Imagine watching your friend step toward a glowing light in the forest, only to see his body lifted into the air and swallowed by something no one could explain. The rest of the group ran in terror, convinced they'd witnessed an abduction. This isn't science fiction. This is the real Travis Walton UFO mystery. And here on Hey Spooky, we're going to unfold every eerie moment of that night. Chapter 1. The Night in the Forest. It was November 5th, 1975. The logging crew, 7 men in total, had been working long hours deep in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest near the small town of Snowflake, Arizona. The job was hard, exhausting, and repetitive, but it was honest work. Chainsaws buzzed through the day, axes thudded into trees, and the scent of fresh-cut pine hung thick in the crisp mountain air. As the sun dipped lower behind the towering pines, the men finally packed up their tools. Sawdust clung to their flannel shirts, sweat mixed with dirt on their forearms, and the truck they all piled into smelled of oil, sweat, and wood chips. The forest around them grew darker with each passing minute. The crew joked and argued like brothers, their voices filling the cab of the old pickup. Cigarettes glowed in the dim light, smoke curling lazily as the truck rumbled down the rough dirt path. The day had been long, and all they wanted was to get back to town, to warmth, food, and rest. But then, through the trees, something unusual caught their attention. At first, it seemed faint, just a shimmer in the distance, like moonlight reflecting off glass. One man leaned forward, squinting out the window. Another stopped mid-joke, his words dying on his lips. Slowly, every pair of eyes turned toward the strange glow. It wasn't flickering like a fire. It wasn't steady like headlights. It seemed to hover, pulsing faintly, almost alive. "What the hell is that?" one of them muttered under his breath. The truck grew quieter. The laughter faded. Only the crunch of tires on pine needles filled the silence. As they got closer, the glow grew brighter. The trees thinned, opening just enough to reveal something impossible. Hovering in the clearing was a metallic craft, shaped like a disc, radiating a golden blue light that shimmered against the bark of the pines. It hung in the air silently, as if it didn't belong to this world. The men sat frozen in awe. Some instinctively leaned back in their seats, as though distance could shield them. Others pressed their faces against the glass, trying to make sense of it. Their breaths fogged the windows, hearts pounding in their chests. "It's a helicopter," one man whispered, his voice shaking. But even he didn't sound convinced. The object made no sound. No blades, no wind, no engine, just an otherworldly hum that seemed to vibrate in their bones. The truck skidded to a stop. No one spoke. No one moved. They just stared at the strange craft, their minds scrambling for answers that didn't exist. And then, in a single reckless moment, Travis Walton made a decision. Unlike the others, who clung to the safety of the truck, Travis reached for the door handle. Before anyone could stop him, he pushed it open and stepped out into the night air. The others shouted instantly, "Travis, don't! Get back here!" But Travis didn't listen. He felt pulled toward the light, curiosity burning hotter than his fear. His boots crunched on the pine needles as he walked slowly forward. Every step brought him closer to something none of them could understand. The glow wrapped around him, painting his figure in eerie colors. From the truck, his friends watched in paralyzed silence, their nerves screaming at them to run, yet their eyes refusing to look away. Travis reached the edge of the clearing. The craft loomed above him now, enormous and silent, its surface gleaming as though it were alive. He tilted his head back, staring up into the impossible. And then it happened. A sudden burst of blue light erupted from the underside of the craft, striking Travis square in the chest. His body lifted violently from the ground, thrown backward like a rag doll. The men gasped as they watched his limbs jerk and convulse in the air, before he crumpled to the earth in a motionless heap. The light snapped off. The forest plunged back into silence. For a long, terrible moment, no one breathed. 6 men sat in the truck, staring into the clearing where their friend had just been blasted by an impossible beam of light. Their hearts raced. Their hands trembled. None of them understood what they had just witnessed, but the truth was undeniable. Travis Walton had walked into the glow and vanished into the unknown. Chapter 2. Panic Among Friends. The moment the beam of light struck Travis Walton, the crew's world collapsed into chaos. Inside the truck, 6 men sat frozen, eyes wide, mouths open, unable to process what they had just witnessed. For an instant, silence ruled. Thick, suffocating, endless silence. And then panic broke loose. "Drive, drive," someone screamed, their voice cracking with raw terror. The driver, Mike Rogers, slammed his foot on the gas. The old pickup roared, tires spitting dirt as it jolted forward. Branches whipped against the windows, the forest blurring past them as the truck rattled violently down the rugged road. Inside, the men clung to the seats, their hearts hammering, their breath coming in frantic gasps. They didn't speak at first. They didn't dare. The only sounds were the roar of the engine and the pounding of their own fear. Every man in that truck knew what they had seen, and none of them wanted to believe it. A few minutes into the wild flight, one of the crew finally broke the silence. His voice trembled, barely above a whisper. "He's dead. Travis is dead." The words sank into them like ice water. Some nodded numbly, their faces pale, while others shook their heads in denial. No one knew what to think. All they knew was that the world they understood just hours ago had shattered. Mike's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. His thoughts were racing, tangled between shock and guilt. He had watched his best friend get struck by something impossible, something not of this earth, and he had done the unthinkable. He had fled. Minutes stretched on, the forest road winding endlessly. The truck bounced over rocks and ruts, the headlights cutting narrow beams into the night. But the further they got, the heavier the guilt pressed on them. Finally, one of the men spoke sharply. "We can't just leave him there." The words cut through the truck like a knife. They all knew it was true. Terrified as they were, abandoning Travis in that clearing was something they could not live with. The group argued, their voices overlapping, fear clashing with responsibility. Some begged to keep driving, insisting Travis was gone. Others demanded they turn around. The debate grew heated, desperate, until finally Mike slammed his hand against the dashboard. "We're going back." The decision hung heavy in the cab. The men exchanged nervous glances, none of them eager to face what waited in the clearing. But deep down, they knew they had no choice. The truck slowed, turned around, and crept back into the dark forest. The ride back was agonizing. Every shadow between the trees seemed alive. Every rustle of branches made their hearts jolt. No one spoke. Their fear was too thick, too raw. When they finally reached the clearing again, the truck's headlights swept over the spot where Travis had fallen. And what they saw made their blood run cold. The clearing was empty. The strange craft was gone. The golden blue glow had vanished. The forest stood silent, dark, and indifferent. And most chilling of all, Travis Walton was nowhere to be seen. The men jumped out of the truck, calling his name, their voices cracking in the cold air. They ran across the clearing, scanning the ground, searching the shadows. But there was nothing. No sign of Travis. No body. No footprints. Just the memory of the blinding light and the sickening silence that followed. Panic turned into dread. They had witnessed their friend struck down by something unearthly, and now he had simply disappeared. Some of the men collapsed onto the ground, running their hands through their hair, muttering in disbelief. Others paced, swearing under their breath, caught between terror and guilt. No matter how they looked at it, the reality was unbearable. Travis Walton was gone. Eventually, with no other choice, the crew returned to the truck and drove toward town. The silence inside the cab this time was suffocating. Each man was lost in his own storm of fear. If they told the truth, who would believe them? If they stayed quiet, how would they explain Travis's disappearance? Either way, they were trapped. By the time they reached Snowflake, it was well past midnight. Exhausted and trembling, they went straight to the authorities. The sheriff, upon hearing their frantic story, stared at them in disbelief. 7 rough, hard-working loggers stood before him, claiming that their friend had been taken by a glowing craft in the woods. The officers listened, their faces tightening with suspicion. Whispers spread quickly. Either these men had lost their minds, or they were covering up something far darker. And in that small Arizona town, rumors began to twist and multiply. If Travis Walton wasn't taken by something from the sky, then maybe his friends had murdered him, and the alien story was just a desperate lie. The police launched an immediate investigation, But no answers came quickly. All anyone knew for certain was this: Travis Walton was missing for 5 days. Chapter 3: The Search and Suspicion. By sunrise, word had spread through Snowflake, Arizona. Travis Walton was gone. The story raced across town like wildfire. At the diner, people whispered between bites of breakfast. At the gas station, customers lingered, talking in hushed tones. Some scoffed. Those boys are pulling a prank. Others leaned closer, lowering their voices. What if they're telling the truth? But beneath it all was a darker suspicion. If Travis wasn't taken by something from the sky, then where was he? Sheriff Marlon Gillespie and Deputy Chuck Ellison were the first to hear the cruise account in detail. 7 loggers, their faces pale, voices shaky, swore that Travis had been struck by a blinding beam of light and then vanished into thin air. They described the strange craft, the hovering glow, the impossible silence of the forest. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. It wasn't just the words that unsettled them, it was the men themselves. These weren't pranksters or thrill seekers. They were hard-working locals with no history of trouble. And yet, their story was too bizarre, too impossible to accept without doubt. The sheriff asked the most pressing question: "Where's the body?" The loggers looked at each other, their silence heavy. They had no answer. That same day, a search party was organized. Dozens of men gathered, local law enforcement, volunteers, even hunters familiar with the rugged terrain. They fanned out across the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, combing every trail, every clearing, calling Travis's name into the cold November air. The forest was unforgiving. Thick pines loomed overhead, their needles muffling sound, while icy winds cut through the searchers' jackets. Dogs were brought in to track a scent, but their noses led nowhere. Helicopters circled above, their spotlights piercing the canopy, but they found nothing. Not a shred of clothing, not a drop of blood, not a footprint out of place. As hours turned to days, frustration grew. How could a man simply vanish? The more they searched, the more the case began to look less like a disappearance and more like a crime. Back in town, suspicions hardened. Those boys did something to him. Some whispered at the bar. And now they're spinning some UFO story to cover it up. Others nodded grimly, convinced. After all, wasn't it easier to believe in a fight gone wrong than in flying saucers? Investigators leaned into that theory. The loggers were brought in again and again, interrogated separately, their stories tested for cracks. Yet every time, the accounts lined up, down to the smallest detail. Still, suspicion lingered. The sheriff couldn't shake the feeling that maybe the men were protecting each other. The pressure mounted when the authorities turned to science, polygraph tests. Each member of the crew was hooked up to the machine, wires snaking across their chests, the examiner asking the same burning questions. Did you harm Travis Walton? Did you kill him? Are you lying about what happened in the forest? One by one, the results came in, and one by one, the men passed. It should have cleared them, but for many skeptics, it only deepened the unease. If they were lying, how had they beaten the machine? And if they weren't lying, what kind of truth were they telling? Meanwhile, the forest search dragged on. By the 3rd day, hope of finding Travis alive dwindled. Searchers trudged back into town each night, muddy boots and weary faces telling the same story. No sign, no trace, nothing at all. The crew, exhausted and tormented, lived under a cloud of suspicion. Everywhere they went, eyes followed them. Some neighbors avoided them altogether. Others confronted them directly. Tell the truth. What did you really do to Travis? The men held firm, but inside, fear gnawed at them. If Travis didn't come back, they knew their lives would never be the same. On the 5th night, the sheriff stood before the press, grim-faced. The official statement was bleak. We have no evidence of foul play, but we also have no evidence of anything else. Travis Walton remains missing. The town buzzed with questions, each one darker than the last. Was Travis buried somewhere in the woods, his so-called friends hiding the truth? Or had he truly been swallowed by something beyond human understanding? The tension was unbearable. On one side, lawmen and skeptics muttered about murder. On the other, believers whispered about visitors from the stars. In the middle stood 6 loggers, men who had seen something they could not explain, men who were either liars, killers were the only witnesses to one of the strangest encounters in modern history. And then came the question that no one could silence, the one that haunted every corner of Snowflake. Did they kill him? Or did something unearthly take him? Chapter 4. The Return of Travis Walton. 5 days had passed since Travis Walton vanished into the Arizona woods. In that time, the town of Snowflake had been turned upside down. Search parties had combed the mountains, helicopters had swept the skies, and the logging crew had been interrogated until they were hoarse. Neighbors no longer asked, "Where is Travis?" They asked instead, "What did those men do to him?" But in the early hours of November 10th, 1975, the silence of the desert was broken. A phone rang in the dark, jolting a family awake. On the other end was a weak, trembling voice. It was barely more than a whisper, but it carried the weight of a miracle. "This is Travis. I need help." The call came from a gas station on the edge of town, miles from where he'd disappeared. A frantic rescue party raced to the location, and there, slumped by a payphone, was Travis Walton. He was alive, but he was not the same. His friends scarcely recognized him at first. His clothes hung loose, wrinkled and dirty, as if he had been dragged through wilderness. His face was gaunt, his cheeks hollow, eyes bloodshot and wide with terror. He shook uncontrollably, muttering fragments that made no sense. "They're horrible, not human, don't let them near me." The men rushed to his side, wrapping him in jackets, trying to steady him. But Travis recoiled at their touch, as though every movement around him carried danger. His body was frail, his skin clammy with sweat. He looked less like a man rescued, and more like a man returned from some unimaginable ordeal. He was rushed home, but the reunion was anything but joyous. His family stared at him, stunned, as if they were seeing a ghost. Neighbors whispered from porches, peeking through curtains. And Travis, once a sturdy young logger full of life, sat curled in blankets, shivering, his voice broken. For 5 days, the world had assumed him dead, and yet here he was, alive, his very presence throwing the town into deeper mystery. But survival only raised more questions. Where had he been? Why was he so frail, as though starved and drained of energy? And what did he mean by "they're horrible"? Doctors were summoned immediately. Medical exams revealed severe dehydration, weight loss, and a look of exhaustion far beyond what 5 days in the woods should have caused. His beard stubble suggested the time frame was correct. He hadn't been secretly hiding, at least not anywhere comfortable. And though there were no serious injuries, small marks dotted his arms, almost like needle punctures. Theories exploded overnight. Skeptics insisted the truth was finally within reach. Travis had staged the whole thing, hiding out until he could return with a story of alien abduction. Others whispered a darker possibility, that the crew had indeed harmed him, and this strange reappearance was part of a desperate cover-up. But believers in the UFO story leaned closer, their voices hushed. What if he's telling the truth? What if they took him? What if the stories about the ship in the forest were real? Meanwhile, the police could not ignore him. If this had been a crime, Travis was both victim and witness. They pressed him for details. Where had he been? Who had taken him? What did he remember? Travis struggled. His mind was a storm of fragments, images that dissolved the moment he tried to hold them. He spoke of bright lights, of being trapped in a place he could not understand, of figures that loomed over him with eyes that weren't human. Every time he tried to explain, fear choked him, his body trembling as though the memory itself was poison. They were there, standing over me, watching. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "They're horrible. They're not human." The words sent chills through everyone who heard them. But beyond those broken fragments, Travis had nothing solid to give. No full memory, no clear timeline, just a haunting sense that he had been taken against his will, used for something he could not explain. News spread like lightning. National reporters descended on Snowflake, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. A small-town mystery had become a national sensation. Some headlines screamed, "UFO abduction in Arizona." Others sneered, calling it a hoax designed for attention. But whether they mocked or believed, one thing was certain. The story of Travis Walton was no longer just a local scandal. It was a phenomenon. Yet for Travis himself, there was no glory. His body was frail, his mind fractured. Nightmares woke him in the dark, drenched in sweat, his screams echoing through the house. He avoided mirrors, avoided crowds, and shuddered whenever he saw the night sky. 5 days were missing from his life. 5 days of silence, 5 days of horror. And though he was home, though he was alive, Travis Walton was not free. For deep inside, fragments of memory clawed at him. Sterile rooms, cold metal, staring black eyes, hands that were not hands. And above all, that paralyzing helplessness, the feeling of being prey, of being at the mercy of something utterly alien. The town wanted answers. The police wanted answers. The world wanted answers. But Travis could only whisper the words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. They're horrible. They're not human. Chapter 5. Inside the craft. At first, Travis remembered nothing but light. Not the warm light of the sun, but a searing brilliance that filled every corner of his vision, sharp and sterile, pressing down on him like heat. His chest heaved. His throat ached. Every breath felt like it was borrowed. When his eyes adjusted, he realized he wasn't in the forest anymore. He was lying flat, unable to move, on something cold and metallic. The room around him was silent, except for a low, humming vibration. The air was heavy, almost artificial, carrying no scent, no warmth. Above him, a ceiling curved in a way that didn't feel human. Smooth, seamless, no rivets, no seams, just a single unbroken surface that seemed to glow from within. And then he saw them. Figures, moving slowly in the light. At first, he thought they were men, small, frail men. But as his eyes focused, terror slithered through him. Their bodies were thin, their limbs long, their heads swollen compared to their narrow shoulders. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, with a faint sheen like wax under a lamp. And their eyes, black, endless, and glossy, stared down at him with a calm that felt worse than cruelty. They weren't human. Travis tried to sit up, to scream, to thrash his arms. But nothing worked. His body was heavy, pinned by an unseen force. His throat rattled with air that wouldn't form words. Panic surged through him, hotter than any fear he had ever known. One of the beings leaned closer. Its eyes reflected the sterile light, swallowing Travis's terrified face in their emptiness. A hand, thin, almost skeletal, touched his arm. The skin was cool, clammy. Travis shuddered. He wanted to run, to break free, to smash through walls if he had to. But he couldn't even twitch a finger. The creatures didn't speak. They didn't need to. Somehow, Travis felt their intentions, not in words, but in an overwhelming pressure inside his head. A sensation as if they were probing his very thoughts. He couldn't fight them. The table beneath him tilted slightly, shifting his perspective. A sudden pain, sharp, searing, stabbed through his side. His vision blurred. For a moment, he thought he might lose consciousness again. When he blinked, the room had changed. He was no longer in the blinding chamber. He was in a narrower corridor, the walls smooth and glowing faintly. His feet dragged beneath him, though he didn't know if he was walking or being carried. Ahead, the hall curved into shadows. Panic clawed at him again. He thought of his friends, of the crew screaming as the lights swallowed him in the forest. Were they still out there searching? Did they think he was dead? A door, or something like a door, slid open. Inside, another chamber waited. This one was darker, quieter. The humming was deeper here, almost like the heartbeat of the craft. And at the center of the room stood a strange chair, more like a molded cradle, facing a vast window, or perhaps a screen, that opened to a black void scattered with stars. Travis was shoved toward it. He stumbled, then froze. Because this time, the figures in the room were not the small beings with black eyes. These looked different. Taller, broader. Their skin had a golden tint, their features eerily human-like, but sharper, flawless, almost statuesque. They wore suits, metallic and form-fitting, as if grown from their bodies rather than stitched. Their eyes were not black voids, but bright, glimmering, with colors Travis couldn't name. For a moment, relief flickered in him. Maybe these were humans, pilots, astronauts, rescuers. But then, one of them raised a hand, and the same paralyzing heaviness filled his limbs. He was not safe. The tall beings moved with absolute precision, as though every gesture was rehearsed. They guided him, without words, without force, into the chair. His body sank against the cold surface. Straps or restraints melted into place, though he never saw them move. And then the screen before him came alive. Stars shifted, patterns spun, colors burst and bent in ways that defied earthly skies. It wasn't a view of space. It was something else, something stranger. Charts, maps, or a reality his human mind couldn't comprehend. The beings stood behind him, silent, watching. Their presence loomed like shadows pressed against his skin. Travis felt smaller than ever, as though he wasn't just trapped inside their craft, but inside their will. Then came the instruments. A sharp gleam to his right, something metallic lowering toward him, a device with a curved tip glinting under the sterile light. He thrashed, screamed, his voice ragged at last, but it made no difference. The device pressed against his temple. A jolt ran through him, not of pain, but of something deeper, stranger. A vibration in his skull, as though his very thoughts were being pulled apart, rearranged, studied. Images flashed. His childhood home, his mother's voice, the woods he loved, then all gone, like pages ripped from a book. Travis gasped. His chest heaved. His body shook with the desperate need to fight, but he remained locked inside their control. Time slipped away. Seconds felt like hours, or maybe hours collapsed into seconds. He could no longer tell. The only reality was fear and the silent gaze of the beings around him. And then, suddenly, it ended. The restraint lifted. The heaviness faded. The chair was empty. The beings stepped back, dissolving into the sterile glow. Travis collapsed onto the cold floor, sobbing. His body curled in on itself, shivering like a child in the dark. For the first time in days, or perhaps forever, he felt alone. The next thing he remembered was light. A burst of white brilliance, a rushing wind. And then, the gas station, the payphone, his own shaking voice begging for help. He was back, but he was not free. For even after his return, even as he sat among family and police and reporters, the images clung to him. The black eyes, the golden beings, the instruments, the maps of stars he couldn't name. They haunted him not as dreams, but as scars carved into his mind. And though people demanded answers, Travis Walton had none. Only this. He had been inside something not of this earth, and whatever had taken him had treated him not with cruelty, nor with kindness, but with the cold, clinical detachment of beings who saw him not as a man, but as a specimen. Chapter 6. The Tests and Doubts. When Travis Walton stumbled back into the world of the living, the nightmare wasn't over. In some ways, it was just beginning. The forest, the craft, the strange beings. That horror was something only Travis had seen. But what came after? The whispers, the accusations, the endless scrutiny? That was something the whole world would see. The moment he returned, exhausted and trembling, people demanded answers. His family crowded around him, desperate to believe. But the authorities, they weren't so easily convinced. To the police, Travis Walton's disappearance had always smelled suspicious. A group of loggers claiming their friend was zapped by a flying saucer? A wild story told by tired men after a long day of work in the woods? No body, no proof, just fear in their eyes. It didn't add up. And now, 5 days later, the dead man walks back into town, dehydrated, terrified, claiming he had been abducted by aliens. For the sheriff's department, this wasn't a miracle. It was a red flag. Had something else happened in that forest? Something darker? Whispers began to swirl in the small Arizona town. Maybe Travis had been attacked by his own crew. Maybe there was a drunken fight, an accident, even a cover-up. Perhaps the spaceship was nothing more than a convenient story, a lie spun to protect guilty men. The police leaned into that theory hard. The crew was questioned again. Every detail of their story was picked apart. Why had they fled? Why hadn't they tried harder to save Travis? Why did they stick so firmly to the UFO tale, even when it made them sound insane? To break them, investigators pulled out a tool often reserved for criminals, the polygraph test, the lie detector. 7 men were strapped to the machine, one after another. Wires across their chests, sensors on their fingers, the hum of the machine recording every spike of their pulse, every catch in their breath. The questions came sharp, direct. Did you harm Travis Walton? Did you conspire to cover up his death? Was your UFO story fabricated? One by one, the needles danced, and one by one, the crew passed. With the exception of one inconclusive result, likely due to nerves, every test said the same thing. These men were telling the truth. They had seen something. They had not harmed their friend. For police, it was a dead end. For skeptics, it was fuel. Lie detectors, they said, weren't perfect. They could be beaten. They measured stress, not truth. A well-rehearsed group of liars could trick the machine. But there was one problem with that explanation. Travis and his friends weren't the type. They weren't actors, they weren't trained, and they weren't clever manipulators. They were loggers, ordinary men, thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Still, doubt lingered. When Travis himself finally faced the machine, his results came back, murkier. Stress, trauma, and confusion muddied the outcome. Skeptics jumped on it immediately. If he was really abducted, why can't the machine prove it, they asked. But others pointed out, how could anyone expect clean results from a man who had just endured the most traumatic experience of his life? While the debate raged, the media caught fire. Within weeks, the Walton case exploded beyond Arizona. Newspapers across America splashed his pale, haunted face across front pages. "Man abducted by UFO," screamed the headlines. Talk shows invited him to tell his story. Television specials recreated his ordeal with glowing lights and eerie sound effects. To believers, Travis Walton became living proof that alien abductions were real. But for skeptics, he became a target. Scientists rolled their eyes, psychologists muttered about hallucinations, and debunkers lined up to poke holes. Some claimed Travis had suffered a mental breakdown. Others said he was hiding in the woods during those 5 days, waiting for the perfect dramatic reappearance. A few even accused him of pulling a publicity stunt for fame and money. And yet, through it all, the core question remained unanswered. If this was all a hoax, how did 7 terrified loggers pass polygraph tests about it? That single detail kept the case alive. Even decades later, when people look back on Travis Walton's story, it's the lie detectors that make them pause. Skeptics can argue about memory, about stress, about misinterpretation of events. But science had been brought in, and science had declared the men truthful. Still, suspicion never fully lifted. For Travis, that suspicion was almost worse than the abduction itself. He had lost 5 days of his life, endured sights and sensations that scarred his mind forever. Yet instead of compassion, he was met with interrogation. Instead of healing, he was dragged before cameras, strapped to machines, accused of being a liar, a fraud, or worse. And the questions only grew louder. If he was lying, why cling to a story so humiliating, so unbelievable, one that brought more ridicule than reward? And if he was telling the truth, what did it mean for the rest of us? Because if Travis Walton was truly taken aboard a craft not of this earth, then humanity had just been handed proof that we are not alone, and proof that those others can reach down and take us at will. The Walton case became a battleground. Believers saw a brave man standing against the tide of doubt. Skeptics saw a storyteller who refused to break character. And in the middle was Travis himself, haunted, scarred, and forever caught between 2 worlds. For law enforcement, the matter eventually closed. No crime could be proven, no body found, no charges filed. Travis Walton was alive, and whatever had happened to him, real or imagined, was beyond their jurisdiction. But for the public, the story never truly ended. Every TV appearance, every interview, every retelling of that night only added fuel. Polygraph experts defended the results. UFO researchers hailed it as one of the strongest abduction cases ever recorded. And through it all, skeptics sharpened their knives, unwilling to let the case stand as proof. And so, the doubt remains. Was the lie detector fooled? Was Travis Walton a man broken by trauma and fantasy? Or was he a witness to something beyond human comprehension? The world wanted answers, but the only man who had them was Travis himself, and his eyes, every time he spoke, held a shadow no test could measure. Chapter 7: The Lifelong Shadow. For most people, 5 days lost in the woods would eventually fade into memory. For Travis Walton, those 5 days defined the rest of his life. When he reappeared, gaunt and shaken, he probably thought the worst was behind him. The terror inside the craft, the cold stares of the beings, the helplessness. Surely nothing in the ordinary world could compare. But Travis soon learned that survival was only the beginning. The real nightmare was what came after. At first, there was shock and relief. His family clung to him, convinced they had been given a miracle. Friends hugged him like a ghost come back to life. The crew, still haunted by those lights in the forest, finally felt vindicated. For them, his return was proof they hadn't gone insane. They had seen what they had seen. But outside that small circle of believers, the reaction was far colder. The town buzzed with rumors. Some whispered that Travis had been hiding all along, camping in the hills until the right moment to step back into the spotlight. Others accused him of staging everything for fame, or money, or simply the thrill of fooling the world. And still others went darker, suggesting drugs, mental illness, or even a stage cover-up for violence among the logging crew. Travis became a walking contradiction. To UFO believers, he was a hero, living proof of contact with another intelligence. To skeptics, he was a fraud, the latest in a long line of charlatans spinning campfire tales. And to law enforcement, he was a nuisance, an unsolvable puzzle that left nothing but embarrassment in its wake. For Travis himself, it was suffocating. He couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. Grocery stores, gas stations, bars. Eyes followed him, whispers trailed behind. Some people offered handshakes, others spat insults. He was alternately celebrated and mocked, often in the same breath. And then came the journalists. Cameras showed up at his door. Reporters shoved microphones in his face. Talk shows invited him to tell his story to the nation. For a moment, it seemed like Travis had been transformed into a reluctant celebrity. But fame is a cruel master. Every appearance, every interview, became another round of interrogation. What did they look like? What did they do to you? Are you sure you're not making this up? No matter how many times he told his story, no matter how consistently his details matched, doubt clung to him like a second skin. It wasn't just strangers, either. Old friends grew distant, unsure if they could trust him. Employers hesitated to hire him, not wanting the circus that followed. Even within his own family, cracks formed. Relationships strained under the constant weight of public scrutiny. The abduction hadn't just taken Travis for 5 days. It had taken his normal life forever. And in the shadows, other forces began to stir. UFO researchers latched onto his case as one of the strongest ever documented. Conferences invited him to speak. Researchers begged for interviews. Books were written. To them, Travis was living proof that humanity wasn't alone. He became a cornerstone of the UFO movement, his story cited again and again as evidence. But with that attention came enemies. Skeptics, debunkers, even government-linked voices worked tirelessly to discredit him. They combed through every detail, every statement, every inconsistency, desperate to tear the story apart. A missed word here, a slightly different phrasing there, was treated as a smoking gun. Travis found himself trapped between two extremes, praised as a prophet, condemned as a liar, with little room to simply be a man. And the weight only grew heavier with time. Imagine trying to live with that. To go on dates, raise children, pay bills, all while carrying a story so unbelievable that half the world mocks you and the other half worships you. Imagine trying to hold a steady job while people show up just to gawk at the alien abductee. Travis couldn't escape it. Everywhere he went, the story followed. Sometimes it was in the form of curious strangers asking about the ship. Other times it was in the form of cruel laughter, people pointing and whispering behind his back. He tried to move forward, to live quietly, but the shadow was always there. And then there were the nights. Because fame wasn't the only thing Travis brought back from the craft. In his sleep, he relived the sterile rooms, the probing eyes, the cold instruments. He woke in sweats, trembling, sometimes screaming. Doctors suggested trauma, even post-traumatic stress disorder. But how do you treat PTSD when the trigger isn't war or violence, but something no one else believes exists? The fear never fully left him. The memory of helplessness, of being pinned down under alien eyes, haunted him forever. Even decades later, when the world seemed to move on, the Walton case refused to die. Documentaries resurrected it. Talk shows replayed it. Skeptics renewed their attacks. Believers renewed their defenses. And through it all, Travis Walton endured. But endurance came at a cost. His name became more than a man. It became a debate, a flashpoint in the endless war between skeptics and believers. He could never escape it. He could never simply be Travis. He was forever Travis Walton, the man who was abducted by aliens. And that label brought with it ridicule, suspicion, and the heavy loneliness of knowing that no matter how many times he told his story, no one would ever truly understand. The abduction may have lasted 5 days, but the shadow it cast lasted a lifetime. Chapter 8: The Unanswered Question. When Travis Walton finally stepped back into the world after those 5 missing days, the story should have ended. But the truth is, it never did. The case became one of the most investigated UFO abductions in history. Lie detector tests, police records, witness statements, endless interviews, all poured over by skeptics and believers alike. And yet, after decades, no one has ever been able to close the file. The crew, those 6 men who watched the beam of light swallow their friend, stood by their testimony. Most of them passed multiple lie detector tests. They never cracked, never admitted to a hoax. Even when pressured by police, mocked by townsfolk, grilled by investigators, they held firm. To this day, not one of them has ever recanted. So here's the chilling problem. If they were lying, how did they all pass? And if they were telling the truth, then what exactly did they see? The skeptics insist there's a simple explanation. They say the story was concocted for money or fame, that Travis staged his disappearance, that the crew backed him up out of loyalty or fear. They point to inconsistencies, to the hazy memories of trauma, to the way stories can change when told 1,000 times. They say it's just another campfire tale, dressed up as evidence. But the believers? They see something darker. They argue that Travis's story matches too closely with other abduction accounts. The bright light, the sterile rooms, the strange beings with staring eyes. How could a lumberjack in rural Arizona conjure details so eerily consistent with encounters reported all over the world? And then there's the one fact that refuses to go away. Travis Walton was gone, missing, for 5 full days. Search teams scoured the forest, dogs combed the area, helicopters swept the skies. Nothing, no trace, until he reappeared, shaken, dehydrated, and speaking words that sent shivers down the spine. They're horrible, they're not human. So what really happened in those woods? Did Travis Walton truly step onto a craft not of this earth? Did he find himself beneath alien eyes, strapped to a table, while instruments cold and unfeeling probed him? Or was it all a trick, an elaborate stunt that got out of hand, cemented forever by the sheer strangeness of his disappearance? No matter which side you lean toward, one thing is certain: the mystery refuses to die. Even now, decades later, the Travis Walton case remains one of the most famous UFO abductions ever recorded. It has been dissected in books, films, documentaries. It has been mocked on late-night talk shows and whispered about at UFO conferences. And still, no one can prove it true or false. And maybe that's the most terrifying part. Because if Travis lied, then the lie is one of the most enduring in modern history, able to withstand decades of scrutiny without ever truly breaking. But if he didn't lie, then the truth is something far more unsettling. It means we are not alone. It means something is out there, watching. And it means, at any moment, the sky above us could split open with light, and you, too, could vanish into the unknown. As you lay in bed tonight, staring at the ceiling, ask yourself this. When you hear the hum of a passing plane or see a flash of light beyond the trailing, how certain are you that it belongs to us? The Travis Walton case leaves us with a question no one has answered. And maybe, deep down, we don't want the answer at all.